Thank you, choir. Thank you, Patrick. I understand I was expecting an octet today, but I've been told it's actually a nonet. Is that right? Nine? I take it on from a very good source that is the term for 9 people, a nonet. So thank you for that, and thank you for bringing us the music today. You know, I really appreciate, I've said it numerous times to numerous people, but I need to tell you again how much I appreciate your willingness and capability of stepping up so that I could be with my family this past week through some very difficult times. I appreciate it greatly. And unfortunately, though, it meant that I had to miss some of the favorite things about the life of the Old Stone Church, one of which is working with the wedding couples through a marriage weekend retreat. Particularly, I missed the Friday night. Judy does a great job of getting couples to stand up, as awkward as it may feel at the very beginning, to introduce themselves to one another and to tell their story about how they met. And it seems to me there's always some sort of very magical, mysterious, sacred even, story that couples have to tell about how God brought them together. Well, this past week, as I mentioned, I was up with my folks during a very difficult time, helping my dad get set up for some home hospice care. And he shared with me many stories, one of which was the story about him and my mother meeting for the first time. These are stories that have been told over and over in our family, but somehow as you're getting closer and closer to death's doorstep, those stories have more of an impact. But he told us the story of how he had met my mother, and I wanted to share that with you today, particularly because we have some couples here, but also I think you'll understand how it connects with our gospel reading today in just a moment. Some of you know my dad was a football player, played for Ohio University during his undergrad years, and when he finished his undergraduate studies at Ohio University, he went to Ontario to live with his uncle and to do seminary work at McMaster University. It's a Baptist seminary there. And during that time, he became a chaplain for a Baptist church camp where he met my mother. A young, lovely woman, a trained vocalist from a podunk town, a really small town called Petrolia, Ontario. It's a very small rural town of about 4,000 or 5,000 people, maybe 20 miles west of Port Huron, Michigan. You cross the river there into Sarnia and keep going into the country until you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. That's where my mom was from. But my dad fell in love with her right away, and he came home after the weekend at the church camp, and he told his uncle, who was really more like a brother to him, that he'd met the girl of his dreams. He'd met this beautiful woman that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. And my uncle, who'd often overseen my father's upbringing, my grandfather was a U.S. Army chaplain and was often away, so my uncle took quite an investment and ownership in my dad. And he said, well, tell me about this woman. And my dad described this young woman as everything she was. And then my uncle said, well, where is she from? And my dad said, she's from Petrolia, Ontario. As I mentioned, Petrolia is a kind of a podunk town. It's a wonderful town and good people, and if any of them happen to be watching this sermon on YouTube, we love Petrolia. But it is kind of a small, nowhere town, and I think my uncle had an expectation that my father one day, becoming a Baptist minister, would meet a fine young woman from perhaps one of the great cities of North America, a Cleveland or a New York or a Chicago or a Toronto, but Petrolia? So when my uncle asked my father, where is this woman from? And my dad said, Petrolia, my uncle sort of rolled his eyes. And he said, can anything good come from Petrolia? Thankfully, not only did many things good come from Petrolia, but at least one very good person came from Petrolia. And thankfully, my father didn't let his uncle's kind of prejudice, his misperception about Petrolia get in the way of marrying my mother. First and foremost, because I wouldn't be here, and I'm really glad to be here. But my folks also had 54 years of incredible, sacred, wonderful, miraculous, even in a sense kind of revolutionary love. A kind of love in their marriage that changed their hearts, it changed their lives, and through them and their faithful witness through their marriage and their servanthood throughout their married life together, they changed the world in many ways. But I was thinking, how many times do we accidentally let our misperception become a wall between us and love? How often do we allow preconceived notions or what John Wesley called popular prejudice get in the way of our falling in love or our coming into deeper relationship with others or even deeper relationship with God? Take a look at Nathanael. That's who my uncle was quoting when he said, "Can anything good come from Petrolia?" You remember Philip said to Nathanael, "Nathanael, we have found the one we've been searching for. We have found the one we have been praying for, studying for, researching for, praying, longing for. We have found the Messiah." Nathanael says, "Philip, that's wonderful news. Who is it?" You remember Philip says, "Is Jesus of Nazareth." And what's Nathanael do? He rolls his eyes and he says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Now, of course, you may not know this, but Nazareth at the time of Jesus was kind of low on that status. There was a low rung on the status ladder at the time of Jesus. They were kind of new to Judaism, 100 years new to Judaism. Didn't go all that far back. They were sort of the illegal immigrants to Judaism at the time of Christ. So Nathanael's got some I guess, well-founded or at least rooted prejudices, popular prejudices, as Wesley called it. And so he rolls his eyes. Can anything good come from Nazareth? It's not surprising that he would say that about the Messiah. In fact, he wasn't the first one to allow his misperceptions about where the Messiah would come from to get in his way of meeting the Messiah, the Son of God. You remember just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the Magi, the wise men who had studied and prepared and researched and then followed that star that would lead them to the birth of Christ, which was Bethlehem, right? But where did these smart guys, these scholars, go to find Jesus? They didn't go to Bethlehem first, did they? They went to the big kahuna of cities. They went to New York of cities. They went to Jerusalem, the city of God. Because, of course, the Son of God, the Messiah, wouldn't be born in podunk Bethlehem. He wouldn't be raised in podunk Nazareth. He would, of course, be born in God's city, Jerusalem. And that's where they went first. And who did they go to first looking for Jesus, the Messiah? They went to the king, to Herod. All of a sudden, I'm thinking, wise men aren't really all that wise in some ways. I mean, really think about it. Who stands to be most threatened by the birth of a new king but King Herod? And these wise guys, they march into the city of God. They go straight to the city of God, and they go straight to the king's palace, and they said, "King Herod, where's this guy who's going to overthrow you?" Wise guys, maybe, not wise men. I'm not so sure. They allowed their misperception, a popular prejudice, to get in the way of really finding the Christ, of entering into relationship, being able to serve them with their gifts. That's Nathanael. When Philip tells him we found the Messiah, it's Jesus of Nazareth, he rolls his eyes and says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" I think about how many times I've seen the opposite, where people transcend popular prejudice and they discover some miracles in their lives. They discover love, they discover a joy, they discover God's Spirit in their lives. I was thinking about one couple in this church here today who shared with me their story about meeting at a time when Protestants and Roman Catholics didn't get married. And I think about the kind of popular prejudices that might have got in their way from joining in a sacred union with one another. Back in the late 50s, perhaps early 60s. Frank, I don't want to date you wrong there. But I know the courage that faith can bring to you to transcend those popular prejudices, because I've seen it in people. And I don't want to mention Frank and Judy's name because I don't want to embarrass them, so I won't. But there are other people here who are doing that even today. I know there's a couple who are here at Old Stone every Sunday, and she's Protestant, he's Jewish, but they transcend the boundaries. They transcend the popular prejudices that might keep love down, that might keep love apart, that might keep the Spirit of God within them quiet. Instead, faith allows them to have courage to overcome those popular prejudices. Can anything good come out of you? I'm sure it can, if it's a response made in faith. Could anything good come out of Nazareth? Of course it could. The Son of God came from Nazareth. Jesus Christ, that's God's greatest story of taking an ordinary place and bringing someone extraordinary out of it. Taking an ordinary marriage or an ordinary couple or an ordinary life and doing extraordinary things with it. But I was thinking about popular prejudice and how it affects not just individuals, but how it can affect a people as a whole. How it can affect an entire city. You remember Jonah went to Nineveh, a.k.a. Cleveland. He went to Nineveh and spoke to an entire people and said, this whole city has a spirit that's choking out the life of God, and you need to turn. You need to repent, is the word, back to God. And they fasted and put on the sackcloth, and the mayor put out a decree that we as a people. And I think about how Nathaniel looked at Nazareth as an entire kind of group, as an entire people. Can anything good come out of that place? And I started thinking about if ever there was a place that has been misjudged perhaps by popular prejudice, our great city of Cleveland has to be in the top 5. Maybe somewhere right around Petroleum, maybe. I think, I've heard people malign unfairly our city as a whole. In fact, Reverend June was telling me she was coming back from Fort Lauderdale last Saturday night, and her plane had to stop in Nashville to let some people off, let some people on, and refuel before coming on here to Cleveland. And she said as the plane was making its descent into Nashville, the pilot said, "Okay, folks, we'll be landing in Nashville in just a few moments. Those of you going on to Cleveland, just please remain on the plane." And then he said, "Although I don't know why anyone would go to Cleveland." And yet you've heard it too, haven't you? I said to June, I think he's just jealous because Cleveland got the medical mart and Nashville didn't. They were our competition and we beat them to the punch. Maybe he was speaking out of jealousy. But it's not just outsiders who malign Cleveland, Pittsburgh fans. I think some of the popular prejudice that we experience that holds our city down, that holds us back, is generated from within. Martin Marty, a theologian, talked about an angel or a spirit that hovers over a church. He also talked about an angel or a spirit that hovers over a city, over a people, that grips a people. I've been in Cleveland 3.5 years now, and I have to tell you, some who are the hardest on Cleveland are Clevelanders themselves. Not all of them, but I think there are some who are gripped by that spirit that Martin Marty talked about, that belief that somehow we are the mistake on the lake. Let's get over that. I was, 40 years ago, 45 years ago? I wasn't here. Some of you weren't here, and yet we allow it to perpetuate itself. Well, there's that kind of spirit that kind of grabs onto us as a city, and I find Clevelanders themselves saying, can anything good come out of Cleveland? Is that because the Browns lost? Or the Cavs? Get over it. Those are our teams. I feel like I'm not only a big proponent of Jesus Christ and the proponent of the Old Stone Church, I think I'm a big proponent of the city of Cleveland, Ohio. And I think the hardest group I have to convert are those that group who are gripped by that spirit here in Cleveland. And what's really odd is I can tell people about all the great things going on in this city. First and foremost, Cleveland offers so much, whether it's the second largest theater district in the entire country, the amazing Cleveland Orchestra, some of the nicest, most fantastic restaurants you'll find anywhere. Somebody told me about an article that they'd read once that said the best restaurants in Cleveland, or in Chicago. I'm tripping over my own words, I'm so excited. The best restaurants in Chicago are in Cleveland. And I believe it. My wife and I go up to Toronto a lot to see our son and his girlfriend who live in Toronto. I keep telling them, this is a great city, but where are your good restaurants? I can't find a good place to eat there. But Cleveland, we got restaurants coming out our ears. It's a wonderful place to be. I talk about our thriving downtown and how things are going here. $2.5 billion worth of economic development going on in the downtown core alone. The medical mart, there's cranes going up outside my window. I talk about the Ernst & Young project in the flats, East Bank here, East Bank. I talk about, for better or for worse, we got $300 million being spent across the square at the new casino that's coming to Cleveland. I talk about Cleveland State University and how it's impacting our downtown community with more residential living. I can go on and on and on about all the great things that are happening in downtown Cleveland. People still say, yeah, but it's like the armpit of the region. What spirit is gripping that person? What popular prejudice is creating a wall for that kind of person who can't see that or can't see beyond the wall? What sort of opportunity and possibility is happening, is that person missing because they believe nothing good can come from Cleveland? And it's not just downtown. There's great things happening all over this city. My dear friend Chris Renane is here today, and he can tell you that the same sort of great things are happening in University Circle. Probably more than $2.5 billion worth of economic development, a whole cultural epicenter being built here. We brought friends in from Canada, from Windsor, Ontario, and we drove them through downtown, and we took them by the Rock Hall and the Science Center and the lake. Oh my goodness, a beautiful lake. And then we took them down to University Circle, and they said, wow, Cleveland is beautiful. We never knew. And I'm thinking, why didn't they know? Who's telling them otherwise? Maybe Cleveland has a rebirth when we have a shift in attitude. When we stop seeing a popular prejudice and when we stop accepting that popular prejudice and we begin seeing the world, perhaps our city, perhaps the way God sees our city. Seeing it through the eyes of possibility. Seeing it through the eyes of the kind of integrity that's here. Yes, I said there's one kind of Clevelander that's pretty good at maligning its city, but there's another kind of Clevelander too, isn't there? There's a kind of Clevelander that's so passionate. They're so passionate about their city that they believe that with just a little bit of faith and a whole lot of hard work, we can build a city of God right here. A green city on a blue lake where the Spirit of God is the ruling angel or the ruling spirit of our city. You know, you can try all you want to convince people about the great things going on in this city, but unless the conversion begins in the heart, unless we start believing it ourselves, roll up our sleeves, get to work, we might miss it. We may be actually unwittingly perpetuating that popular prejudice. You know, I was thinking, I think that's why I like Old Stone Church so much. I think that's why you're here. I think that's why I'm here. Because there's a belief that we are bringing a spiritual heart. We here are coming from east, west, south. I don't think there's any from the north, unless you came across by boat today. But here we've gathered where east meets west, here in the heart of our region to claim sacred space, to kind of put on the sackcloth that Jonah talked about for our entire region, to pray and lift up our city as the great place it is. Do you know every day our front doors are open at noon. Fridays they're open for a few hours. There are a lot of people who come to Cleveland. They're not from here. And our open doors people become some of the welcome mat people for the city of Cleveland. Not just Old Stone Church. They They start telling them about all the great things going on here. And if you listen to our Open Doors people, you'll hear people say how people from all over this country, in fact, all over the world, come here and tell us what a great place we have. That many, many good things can come from Cleveland, just as many, many good things came from Nazareth. I think that the transition, the conversion happens when we believe it for ourselves. When we start living out of a faith that even in the hardest times, you remember 2008 was a really hard time for our city. You remember that we were declared second poorest city in the nation in 2008. You may also remember that I reminded you that we may have been the second poorest city in the nation, but we were the second poorest city in the wealthiest nation on the planet, and we needed to keep that in perspective. And just 4 years later, I don't think that's the case anymore. 4 years later, because we refuse to give up, because we believe in a higher spirit, a higher truth, our city is starting to thrive again. You may remember I held up a couple of years ago, or a couple of months ago, a front page of the business section of the newspaper, and there's a big picture of the old stone church. And underneath it said, "Look to Cleveland." And I asked the group gathered, we were down at our leadership series downstairs during Lent. I said, how many saw this on the front page of the Plain Dealer? Nobody had. And it's not surprising because it was the front page of the business section of the Detroit Free Press. Look to Cleveland. Just a few years later, as we start kind of gravitating toward a new kind of belief, the rest of the nation is starting to look at Cleveland as the medical capital of the world. Medical Mart, Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals, Metro. Who do I leave out? Where people are we're changing the perception because we refuse to believe a popular prejudice. I think we have the ability to do that in our own lives too, whether it's in our marriage. Maybe you're getting pressure from some of your parents or friends who are saying, "Are you kidding? You're going to marry that person?" You need to say, get over the popular prejudice. Because there's a higher power, there's a spirit at work here. And even in the challenging times, the dark times, there is one who is here with us even now. I sent you all a letter last week via email, and I think Reverend June shared with you some of what was in that. And some of what was in that was the experience my father had as he moved to that difficult decision to stop all treatments, all chemos, etc., and go into hospice care. He'd said last summer that he asked, how will I know when it's time to stop treatment? And we talked about it and prayed about it, and he said, I guess I'll know when the Lord tells me so. And just last week, as we were sitting in the hospital trying to make decisions, he talked about how he'd lost the eyesight in one of his eyes from the chemo treatments. But he sensed in the blind spot, in the corner of the room, a presence there with him, the presence of God. And the day that his oncologist came in to tell him it was time to stop treatments, he said he'd already heard 2 hours earlier the voice of that one in the blind spot, the voice of that one who'd been present with him all along, telling him, it's time to come home, Bob. It's time to come home. I'm sharing that with you because I want you to understand that even in our challenging times, even when we're confronted by popular prejudice, there's one here who's abiding with us, even now. He may be there just to the side in your blind spot, but sure enough, he's there. He's that good one who came from Nazareth, the Son of God, the Messiah, the Anointed One. He's with us even now. He's here to remind us that if we can lean on Him, if we can trust Him, we might just pole vault ourselves right over the walls of popular prejudice. We might just discover God's greatest ability to take ordinary people and do extraordinary things, to take an ordinary city on a lake and do an extraordinary thing by the power of faith. And so I say, keep your hearts, keep your minds, keep your vision open to the one who's sitting in your blind spot even now, cheering you on, saying, yes, we can do it. Praise be to God. Amen.